scriptures say, "Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse." As you know, Seventh-day Adventist church congregations are grouped together into local conferences or missions, and these in turn form unions and divisions which create the general conference. Each portion is a part of a larger whole. Each is essential to the work of God. As treasurer of a local church, you serve as the initial trustee of church funds. Under your care, tithes and certain offerings move to the local conference, where is found the administrative element of the storehouse mentioned in Malachi. At the local conference, important decisions are made concerning the care and nurturing of God's family, payrolls are met, and spiritual guidance is made available. When God called the Seventh-day Adventist Church into existence a century and a half ago, our early leaders determined to follow the biblical principle of designating a central location for the distribution and administration of the tithe. When organizing the nation of Israel, Moses wrote in Deuteronomy 12:5-14, "You shall not at all do as we are doing here today, every man doing whatever is right in his own eyes. There will be the place where the Lord your God chooses to make his name abide. There you will bring all that I command you." To this place came the burnt offerings, the sacrifices, and the tithes and freewill offerings. Today, that place is the local conference with its congregations working cooperatively as extensions of its treasury. When it comes to tithes and offerings, the major emphasis of the church is on local ministries, congregations, and conferences. However, we are called to witness in Jerusalem and Samaria and unto the ends of the earth, which requires organization, planning, management, and specific action. The local church treasurer is the first link, the initial trustee, and the local conference is the anchor point where funds are extended to lands overseas. The dollar of tithe given in North America travels far and wide in the accomplishment of the mission of the church. Here's how that precious dollar is put to work in response to the Gospel Commission. We'll use recent statistics. 73.87 cents is used at the conference level or on behalf of the local conference. 6.93 cents provides support to missionaries and appropriations to worldwide general conference organizations. 10.75 cents is earmarked for our church's retirement program, and 8.45 cents covers operating expenses of the unions, division, and general conference. That is a very hard-working dollar. Although the exact distribution may vary slightly from conference to conference, and because of changes in retirement funding that went into effect January 1 of the year 2000, a few pennies have shifted around a bit, the thrust remains the same. Reports at the end of the year 2000 indicate that 61% of the total tithe was received from North America, with 39% coming from other parts of the world. In excess of $21 million per week flows through the hands of the treasurers of local congregations globally. Praise God for such generosity and confidence. Ray Jimenez was an investment broker before he became a local conference treasurer and has a wealth of knowledge that he's ready to share with us. He will speak about short-term and long-term investments. After his presentation, Phyllis Ware will return to discuss insurance.
Any understanding of stewardship which is simply defined in terms of our giving falls far short of the Christian's responsible use of God-given assets. Jesus states the principle clearly in his parable about the nobleman and his servants to whom he gave gifts. "Put this money to work," he said, "until I come back." Paul enlarges on the concept when he tells us, "Now it is required that those who have been given a trust must prove faithful." Both Jesus' words and those of Paul remind us that there must be thoughtful, careful investing of our resources. Investing properly isn't gambling or speculation. It's taking reasonable risks to earn steady rewards. Risk is a fact of life for any investment. Stock markets plunge, companies go bankrupt, and there are other countless little ways to lose money much less dramatically. There's even risk in doing nothing. Thanks to inflation, $100 left in the bank earning no interest will be worth about $75 in 10 years. Even if you are earning the typical checking or savings interest rate of 2 to 2.5%, you will still be losing money to inflation, which has averaged 3% over the last several years. But before you start to worry about investing, let me assure you that your church is concerned about you and has put in place investment policies to help protect the congregation's assets. Within these investment policies, the church provides a list of both short-term and long-term investments that are considered acceptable. We'll review some of those investments in a moment. As the treasurer of a local congregation, you must remember that all investments must be prudent and in harmony with the laws, rules, and regulations of the jurisdiction in which the individual congregation or school is located. The local appropriate board, in consultation with its finance committee, is ultimately responsible for selecting the types of investments that meet its short or long-term needs. Careful consideration must be given to the regular operating cash flow requirements when making any investment decisions. At the heart of sound investment theory is a simple calculus known as the power of compounding. It is a mathematical certainty, something you can actually bank on. If you put your money in an investment with a given return and then reinvest those earnings as you receive them, the snowball effect can be astounding over the long term. This is particularly true with church funds, where the principal is allowed to grow tax-free. Suppose you have $10,000 in your bank account and decide to put it into an investment with an 8% annual return. Over the space of the first year, you earn $800 on your investment, giving you a total of $10,800. If you leave those earnings alone, rather than pull them out to spend the second year, would deliver another $864 or 8% on both the original $10,000 and the $800 gain. Your 2-year total, $11,664 and climbing. You'll see compounding modest, if steady, gains over the first few years. But the longer you leave your money in, the faster it begins to grow. By year 20 in our example, your money would have almost quadrupled to more than $46,000. If you had invested $20,000, it would have soared to more than $93,000. Of course, the power of compounding works for savings accounts too. But if you adjust the interest rate downward to 4%, a typical return on a cash account, your 20-year return on that $10,000 drops to around $22,000. The lesson is this: the longer you leave your money invested and the higher the interest rate, the faster it will grow. With that in mind, let's look at some of the investments that have been approved by the church. The following have been approved as vehicles for short-term investments. Short-term investments are those with maturities of 12 months or less. Savings banks, savings and loan associations, commercial banks, credit unions. These different banking institutions offer savings accounts that typically pay between 2 to 4% interest. Only the strongest and most secure commercial banks in the community should be used for checking accounts. Investments in savings and loan associations, commercial banks, and certificates of deposits should be limited to amounts covered by insurance provided by the appropriate national government agencies. Certificates of deposit issued by local banks. The basic premise behind a certificate of deposit is simple enough. You lend your bank your money, as little as $100, but often $1,000 or more for a specific amount of time, up to 5 years. In return, you receive a set amount of annual interest on the loan. When the CD contract reaches maturity, when it ends, you get your money back. How much interest you earn is the key. And that depends on a number of factors: which bank you use, the prevailing interest rate environment, how much money you invest, and how long you lock it up. Your local bank most certainly sells CDs, but its rates may or may not be competitive. One way to shop for the best rates is to conduct an internet search, where you can find rates currently offered by banks nationwide. National government obligations, maturing in 36 months or sooner. Examples are Treasury bonds, bills, notes, and savings bonds. Technically speaking, a bond is a loan, and you are the lender. Who's the borrower? Usually the U.S. government, a state or local municipality, or a big company. The bonds issued by Uncle Sam are called treasuries. They're grouped in 3 categories: U.S. Treasury bills, maturities from 90 days to 1 year; U.S. Treasury notes, maturities from more than 1 year to 10 years; U.S. Treasury bonds, maturities from more than 10 years to 30 years. Treasuries are widely regarded as the safest bond investments because they're backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. Bonds of longer maturity tend to have higher interest rates because you're assuming more risk. A 30-year Treasury has more upside than a 90-day T-bill or a 5-year note. Compared to other types of bonds, the 30-year Treasury is considered safe. National government agency issues, also extremely safe and liquid, but offering a slightly higher yield, are government agency bonds issued by the likes of the Tennessee Valley Authority, Farm Credit Financial Assistance Corp., the Federal National Mortgage Association, and the Government National Mortgage Association. They're generally available only through brokers and thus incur commission costs that cut into their yield. Money market funds. Money market funds are often touted as the safest kind of mutual fund. It is almost impossible to lose your principal in one of these things. On the other hand, the returns are low, 4 to 6% on average. Money market funds are most useful for parking cash you need in the short term. The reason money market funds are so stable is because they invest in ultra short-term securities like those issued by banks, the federal government, or big companies with grade A credit ratings. Your return comes in the form of a dividend. In these respects, money market funds are very similar to a bank certificate of deposit. The advantage of a money market fund is that it is completely liquid. Unlike a CD, which will lock up your money for at least 6 months, you can sell your shares in a money fund at any time. They also offer perks like the ability to write checks against the principal. The advantage of a CD is that your deposit is usually insured by the federal government. Union revolving loan funds. This is where your congregation may deposit its money at an adjustable interest rate of return. Deposits are on demand, but exceptional large sums may require a written notice. They generally have rates on par or better than CDs or money market funds. Check with your union conference for current rates. This is one of my favorites, especially since the deposits go to work within the church. The Capstone Social, Ethical, Religious Values Fund, or SERV. Money market, short-term bond, and equity portfolios. These investments are registered indexed mutual funds developed specifically for the Seventh-day Adventist Church to avoid investments in companies that deal in tobacco, pornography, and the likes. In Canada, investments are limited to the following: provincial savings banks, chartered banks operating nationwide, trust and loan companies, obligations to federal, provincial, or municipal governments or agencies of the same, credit unions or Caisse Populaire, commercial paper rated by the Canadian Bond Rating Service as A+ or better, or by the Dominion Bond Rating Service rated as AA or better. All of the above should be limited to amounts covered by insurance provided by the appropriate federal agencies. Now, I'm mindful of the fact that all church and school treasurers may not fully understand each of these investment vehicles presented here. Help is just a phone call away. Contact your conference treasurer and he or she will be more than willing to help you. Even a sound, consistent investment strategy can become discouraging at times, especially when you're not seeing immediate results. That's when you take courage and keep at it. Let's briefly review what is allowable for long-term investments by your congregation or school. Long-term investments are those instruments with maturities that exceed 12 months. General Conference Unitized Funds. Allowed only in consultation with Conference Treasury, these are for funds available for investing at least 3 years. These include both registered mutual funds set up by the church and other United Funds, which do not come under the Securities Exchange Commission's guidelines. Investments include equities and fixed income funds. Other funds that can be used as long-term investments are union revolving loan funds, government, federal agency, and corporate notes, investment grade or better. Even though this is not a seminar dealing with the nuts and bolts of investments, it is important for each treasurer to have some basic understanding of the general policies of the church. Remember, full disclosure to your board is of the utmost importance, and never make an investment decision without first consulting your board. As the treasurer, you need to know the cash needs of your congregation. We all have our responsibilities as stewards of God's money. We need to make sure that God's money is properly invested, be it for short-term or long-term purposes.
The Seventh-day Adventist Church has been blessed with many beautiful places of worship and active schools throughout North America and the world. We have a duty as stewards of God's property to do all that is within our power to maintain and protect those properties against fire, earthquake, theft, accidents, liability losses, and medical claims. We will spend the next few moments highlighting these and other insurance matters. The treasurer or safety officer of the church should initiate measures to prevent losses and or minimize the loss after an occurrence. This person is responsible for maintaining adequate insurance coverage for every possible contingency where a loss could occur. Losses and accidents, including work-related injuries and illnesses, should be reported on a timely basis in harmony with state and or provincial statutes and the terms and conditions of the insurance contracts and other church operating policies. In addition, assets and liability exposures should be insured with a minimum A-grade rating in Best Key Rating Guide or with the church-owned insurance company. To avoid an unintentional lapse of coverage, it will be to your advantage to begin negotiations for the renewal of insurance policies at least 120 days before the expiration dates. It is also your responsibility to hold and maintain a complete record of all policies covering building liability and other assets. The original copy of all such policies should be retained as permanent records. These records should include at least the name and description of the property, schedule of liability exposures, the amount of insurance carried, the name of the company with which it is insured, policy numbers, and the expiration date of the insurance policies. Please put these original documents in a safe place, like a fireproof box or safe. You may take pictures or videotape your inventory, the church building, and valuables, and store them in an alternative place, not on the church premises. You may consider a bank safety deposit box. If denominational facilities are leased, rented, or lent to non-denominational organizations, the user should be required to provide a certificate evidencing general liability insurance and an additional insured endorsement naming the corporate entity holding the title to the facility as an additional named insured. Also, the non-denominational organization should sign an agreement holding the denominational owner harmless from any liability resulting from use of the facility. All churches should name the parent organization or organizations up to and including the General Conference Corporation of Seventh-day Adventists as an additional named insured on all liability insurance policies. Now let's examine some specific coverage you'll need. Property and fire insurance. Adequate insurance should be carried on all properties for fire. It is recommended that the coverage be on the basis of replacement values for both buildings and contents. In a situation where new construction is involved, coverage should begin from commencement of construction. Earthquake and flood insurance. This is a very important coverage and should be considered on all church and school properties. Consideration of the costs, the risks associated with earthquakes and floods in their respective areas, and all other alternatives including closing the church or school in the event of a major earthquake or flood should be carefully evaluated. On-site crime and theft insurance. Churches and schools must protect their properties and monies from the perils of theft, burglary, and robbery. Boiler and machinery insurance. It is recommended that organizations operating either low or high pressure boilers, water heaters, central air conditioning, and commercial freezers or refrigeration units obtain adequate boiler machinery coverage. General liability insurance. There is a definite trend in today's litigious society for nonprofit organizations to be held legally liable for accidents and injuries of every description. A minimum coverage of $1 million should be purchased. Concerning sponsored church and school activities, adequate planning and supervision must be provided in order to prevent accidents. Signed permission forms should be obtained from parents or legal guardians before minor-aged children are allowed to participate in activities. Medical information and release forms should be maintained on all children for use in the event of accident or injury. In addition to general liability, each church and school must have excess liability for catastrophic losses which exceed $1 million limits of primary general liability, employment practices liability, employer's liability, as well as commercial auto and garage policies. Independent construction contractors. All independent construction contractors should be required to maintain a minimum of $1 million limits of liability for major construction projects and a minimum of $300,000 limits of liability for minor construction projects and denominational property. Contractual liabilities. All contracts entered into by churches and schools should be carefully reviewed before they are executed to avoid the unnecessary assumption of risks which may bring liability to the organization. In complex contractual agreements, please contact your legal counsel for review of such contracts before they are signed. Automobile insurance. For those churches that own, rent, lease, or borrow vehicles, adequate liability protection should be secured with adequate limits of bodily injury and property damage. You may want to contact your conference treasurer for limit amounts as they change from year to year. Proper maintenance should also prevent loss. Each vehicle owned or operated by your church or school should be inspected and should adhere to a regular maintenance schedule. Before the vehicle is used, it is the driver's responsibility to check the mechanical condition of the vehicle. If the vehicle is unsafe to operate, substitute transportation must be arranged. All vehicle usage should comply with all federal, state, and/or provincial laws. Vehicles owned or registered in the name of the church or school should not be lent, leased, or rented to non-denominational organizations, nor leased or rented to individuals. All drivers must be properly licensed and comply with all federal, state, and/or provincial laws for the class of vehicle being operated. The recommended minimum age for drivers is 21 years. A separate policy for garage and garage keepers liability insurance should also be purchased. All churches and schools which provide repair services on non-owned vehicles should be responsible for obtaining adequate limits of insurance to cover potential legal liability. Aircraft insurance. Churches and schools authorizing or permitting the operation of an aircraft, whether denominationally owned or non-owned, should be responsible for obtaining adequate insurance to cover potential legal liability, the aircraft, the pilot, and passengers. Employment practices liability. It is crucial for our churches and schools to carefully evaluate the risks associated with sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, discrimination, and wrongful termination, and the financial impact on the entity. Workers' compensation insurance. Denominational organizations are encouraged to secure workers' compensation and employers' liability insurance or its equivalent on all employees. Where workers' compensation insurance is not required by law, coverage may be purchased on a voluntary basis. In some jurisdictions, volunteer workers may be included as a part of the workers' compensation insurance policy. To further protect your church or school when dealing with independent construction contractors, you should require that they carry their own workers' compensation insurance. They should also be required to file proof of such coverage prior to commencement of construction. Volunteer labor insurance. Churches and schools which utilize the service of volunteers should consider providing coverage for accidental injuries which may occur as the result of their volunteer service. Either workers' compensation or a volunteer labor accidental medical insurance policy should be used for this purpose. Now let's focus our attention on executive risk. There are 3 areas of coverage. The first area is directors and officers' liability. This coverage is for wrongful acts of officers and board members in the performance of their authorized duties. The second is employee dishonesty. This coverage is for dishonest acts by employees and volunteers, including local church and school treasurers. Individuals who have committed prior dishonest acts are not covered under the provision of this insurance policy. It is therefore very important during the selection process to be certain that individuals elected to such positions do not have prior records. You may check with your conference treasurer if you have any questions concerning a particular individual. The third area is outside directorship liability. This coverage is for wrongful acts when asked to serve on a board at the request of the church or school. Because each conference may handle payment of insurance premiums differently, please contact your conference treasurer for more details. In certain circumstances, conferences pass such costs on to the local congregation or school. It's important, though, that each treasurer make sure that their local entity is properly covered. I will encourage you to take advantage of workshops and other training seminars sponsored by your conference to further increase your knowledge in the area of insurance. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has made the services of Adventist Risk Management the vehicle through which your insurance needs can be met. They are your partners in ministry. Finally, let us all be diligent in protecting the assets that God has entrusted to us.
Gary Dodge has served as a local conference treasurer in North America longer than most. Throughout his career, he has provided guidance and support to many local church and school treasurers. He will discuss a few administrative areas of importance to your work.
As a church or school treasurer, you probably have some questions about what your job entails. There are many different aspects to the job of treasurer, and we will do our best to highlight some of them here. Usually the only time you hear a lot about a treasurer is when he or she does something wrong or their actions are called into question. However, as a Christian, you can strive to do your job well, knowing your actions are being recorded and your final reward doesn't have to be recognition from people. God sees, God remembers, and God rewards. Trust is very important in the position of treasurer. Trust is basically the treasurer's currency. Unless there is trust among the members of the treasury team, it won't be much of a team. And if there is no trust among the members of the local church or school and you as their treasurer, it won't be a very happy or long-lasting relationship. There are many ways to build trust between the church or school treasurer and the members. One way is to use the restricted or trust funds for the specific purpose the donor intended, and to use the unrestricted funds with utmost prudence and discretion. Beyond that, it is very important to report on the uses of the funds in a timely fashion. When reports are given on a regular basis, it helps to build confidence between members and the treasurer. Another vital element between the local church or school treasurer and the members is that of confidentiality. If word gets around that a person can go to the treasurer and get information about who has given what, you can be sure that the treasurer won't be trusted. The giving records need to be kept in a secure place where they are not generally accessible. People need to know that what they give isn't public knowledge. In actuality, there are very few people who should have access to the church or school financial records. It is also very important that the local church, treasurer, and conference treasury department have a good working relationship. The conference needs the local treasurers to be their frontline resource people, and the local treasurers need the conference treasury to be a source of encouragement, instruction, and support. When the local treasurers and the conference treasury work together effectively, an important team is formed. It could be impossible for the conference treasury to take care of all the treasury needs of the churches and schools in the conference. And it would be equally hard for the local church and school treasurers to take care of all the treasury needs of the conference. But together, great things can be accomplished. The conference depends upon the local treasurers to handle the funds appropriately. In our society, there are many laws that must be obeyed. It can be very difficult to keep up to date on all the changes taking place. The local churches and schools could very well get into trouble just because they are unaware of a law. The conference treasury is committed to being knowledgeable of rules and regulations as they apply to the church at both the conference and local levels. In this way, the conference can help to protect the local churches and schools from making costly mistakes. Having the conference treasury as a resource in this way frees the churches and schools to concentrate on fulfilling their mission. One of the ways the conference may help to serve the local churches and schools is by offering a courtesy payroll service. Payroll has become a very detailed process, and it may be better to have it done centrally by a team who can stay informed of the rules and regulations as they pertain to payroll. Having the payroll done centrally for the whole conference can provide consistency and avoid putting the church at risk both locally and corporately. When the local church and school treasury has payroll needs, it's important to check with the conference treasury for assistance or recommendations. Payroll needs may be served by a commercial entity, a self-administered system, or conference treasury. A self-administered payroll would be a process where all the payroll activities is accomplished at the local church or school. The payroll checks would be prepared, local, state, and federal tax deposits made, quarterly reports filed, and year-end W-2s distributed to the employees. The reporting requirements identified here all have specific deadlines. If they're not met, there may be penalties. Neglecting to abide by the laws as they relate to payroll could put the church at risk. Using a commercial entity requires the local church or school to meet reporting deadlines and provide funding of the earnings and related employee taxes. The agency providing the payroll service would process the appropriate taxes and year-end requirements. Hiring and termination practices are another important payroll-related area. In hiring a person, great care needs to be taken to make sure that all proper paperwork is filled out correctly. It is very important to have such items as the W-4 and the I-9 forms correctly completed. Background checks also need to be run before someone is hired. Making sure a person is eligible to be hired should be accomplished before they show up for work. Once a person is hired, he or she needs to take care to turn in the timesheets which have been completed accurately and reflect the actual hours on the job. Timesheets need to be received in a timely fashion, and ideally signed by both the employee and employer to signify that they both have verified the hours reported. Many problems can arise when timesheets are filled out inaccurately. For instance, let's say Jim is the custodian at Valley Adventist School. He has a habit of simply filling in that he works from 2 p.m. through 5 p.m. every day. Unfortunately, one Tuesday evening, he is working a bit later and is injured while fixing the stair railing. Since his timesheet reflects that he wasn't at work at the time he says he was injured, a workers' compensation claim could be jeopardized.
Ow.
This is just one example of what can happen when timesheets are not filled out accurately. The following examples are related to United States law. Please contact your conference treasury for details specific to your local laws and regulations. An interesting scenario that churches and schools sometimes run into is that of creative remuneration. This can come about in various ways. For instance, the church finance committee and/or church board will look at their finances and say, "This is how much we can afford to pay someone for this job." When you look at the budget and there is only a limited amount of money available, it can be hard to remember that you have to pay at least minimum wage for the hours people work. That isn't negotiable. Failure to pay employees at least minimum wage would be breaking the law in most cases. And as Jesus said, a workman is worthy of his hire. One church didn't have the funds to pay someone to care for the church grounds. So they agreed with the neighbor of the church that she could use a piece of land that belonged to the church in return for caring for the church grounds. Another scenario involving creative remuneration occurred when a church school didn't have quite enough money to hire a teacher. They offered the teacher $20,000 in salary for the year, and then agreed that they would give the teacher a plot of land worth $10,000 in addition to the salary. Sometimes people cannot afford to send their children to church school. Many times, in these cases, the school will try to make a deal with them. You work so many hours a week for us, and we'll help take care of the tuition problem for you. Each of these scenarios may seem harmless at first glance. However, each has several major flaws. In each situation, the value given for work done was not run through the payroll process, so no payroll taxes were paid. The government tends to frown very heavily on such cases. Also, with the church grounds and tuition situation, it could very well be that when it is all figured out, the people were paid less than minimum wage, which could have severe ramifications. The Code of Federal Regulations, Volume 29, Section 541, clearly states that there are very few positions which can be paid a fixed salary. Generally, the only work categories which come under the exempt status, that is, can be paid a fixed salary, are executive, administrative, professional, or outside salesperson. If you are in question as to whether a person would be considered exempt or non-exempt, it is safer to err on the side of classifying them as non-exempt, which means that they will be paid an hourly wage. When faced with a situation of creative remuneration, the best policy is to always talk with the conference treasury before entering into any agreements and listen to the counsel they offer. It is much easier to figure out those situations before they become problems than to try to untangle the mess once something has gone wrong. It is also essential that people receive equal pay for equal work. There may be situations where church secretaries in various churches around the conference are being paid differently. If the payroll is not centralized, it can be very difficult to keep track of what people in certain jobs are generally being paid. And it is far better to do things the right way, right from the start, than to have to be fighting fires because things weren't done the right way to begin with. When there are several churches in an area, it is important to establish an approved range of pay for people in any given position. Many times it's easy for the local churches and schools to view themselves as separate entities, but the conference, which is made up of all the churches and schools, is evaluated as a whole. It's essential to establish and maintain guidelines within the conference. In a church or church school setting, people might feel like they should work more than they are being paid. For instance, suppose the school can only afford to pay the janitor for 15 hours a week, but there are some things that really need to be done, and it can take more than 15 hours of work to accomplish them. The janitor, who believes in and supports the mission of the school, decides that he or she should work his or her 15 hours and then volunteer however long it takes to get the rest of the job done. However, according to the federal law, employees cannot volunteer any part of the job that they were hired for. If the janitor volunteered to help the secretary stuff envelopes or something, that would be fine. But the janitor cannot volunteer to stay late to do his or her own job, just as the secretary must not volunteer to stay late to finish some paperwork without pay. Another area that needs to be tracked is whether or not an employee is eligible for a retirement plan. In order to be eligible for the Adventist retirement plan, an employee must work at least half-time. If an employee is eligible for the retirement benefits, he or she must fill out the proper paperwork, including who the beneficiary would be in case of his or her death. You can contact your conference treasurer for qualifying details. Something else that needs careful consideration is wrongful termination. Being sued for wrongful termination is something we should strive to stay as far away from as possible. One good rule of thumb to help protect against wrongful termination suits is to make no written or verbal agreement with employees guaranteeing any length of their employment. Other situations that can give rise to wrongful termination suits include failure to treat cases of employee misconduct alike, failure to consistently follow the organization's rules and procedures, and failure to review all pre- and post-employment written material which may unwittingly contain implied long-term promises which the local church or school is unwilling to honor. In the unhappy event that termination of an employee is necessary, it is crucial to be certain that all of the organization's progressive discipline and termination policies have been carefully followed. It is also imperative that the organization's policies and procedures are communicated to employees on a regular basis, with special note made of any changes. If you sense that your church or school may be moving towards something that could involve a wrongful termination suit, it would be very wise to begin discussing it with the conference treasury team as early as possible. It has been said that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And if that is true anywhere, it is certainly in cases that might involve wrongful termination suits. When and how does a church or school conduct employee performance reviews? Usually performance appraisals are unscheduled and are the result of concerns expressed by a board member. The evaluation is extemporaneous. It is like pulling perceived facts from a bag. Sometimes the discussion comes around the punctuality of the employee. Are they there on time, or are they always late? And this causes concerns and distress among some of the members of the church or school or parents. Another item that we sometimes find that brings much discussion is that of what do people wear? Whether or not it is appropriate dress and attire, whether it be a lady that is teaching or on the staff, or whether it is a gentleman wearing a shirt that may have a logo of some organization that we don't necessarily find to be acceptable in our thinking. Other items that we might find in the bag that might bring discussion would be, we're not sure whether or not they're listening or to the right music that meets our particular taste. Or perhaps they're reading a book, a paperback book that might be a novel rather than the books that we think that they should be reading. All of these evaluations many times are reflected upon the employee's spirituality. There is a question about that. One of the things that involved in the discussions, whether it's accurate or inaccurate, is that a little bit of dirt comes into play. It's kind of spread around in the conversation. I have some dirt, and you pour it out onto your table in the discussion, and it gets spread around, and then we find that some of it may not be accurate, and so we try to clean it up and the best we can, but you find that even after you've tried to clean it up, it still leaves a residue. Avoid wrongful termination by having scheduled employee work performance evaluations. Practice being honest with the employee. The employee deserves accurate feedback so appropriate improvements can be made in the job performance. Failure to practice proper evaluations can subject the church to a wrongful termination claim. The effects of such an action is always costly in relationships and finances. Being audited is something most people anticipate with fear and trembling. But as a church or school treasurer, you can welcome it as a review of your work that will lend third-party credibility to what you are doing. Audits are done for a variety of reasons. One purpose of an audit is to train or instruct. By going through the auditing process, you will learn a lot about the Treasury policies and their practical applications. Second, the feedback you receive from the auditors will only serve to increase your effectiveness as a treasurer. Third, being audited will help you have more confidence in your work because it will give you the validation of a third party. And finally, as part of the conference treasury team, you need to know your significance to the treasury process. Audits are important to any organization that receives donations. They help to answer the question of, are we being good stewards? And how do we know that the funds we give are being handled appropriately? Audits and financial reporting help to give a sense of security to the donor and provide credibility to the local church or school treasurer. The financial auditing process is not designed to be a fraud audit, but conducting audits is important because, unfortunately, even in the church, there can be dishonesty, and performing these audits can help to uncover it. There has been a trend of significant amounts of money being embezzled by church and school treasurers. In many ways, it would be easier and more comfortable to just ignore such statistics, but we cannot. With each year, the problem seems to grow worse, not get better. One of the effects is that the cost of the insurance we as a church have to carry to cover the losses we suffer from embezzlement keeps increasing. That hurts us all, and it tends to cause people to view even completely honest treasurers with skepticism. This necessitates conducting third-party audits at the local level, knowing that their church has been audited and found to be doing well gives people a sense of assurance and increases the trust they have in their treasurer. So now you may be wondering what to expect. What is an audit like? Usually the first step in the audit process will be a letter from the conference auditor to you, the treasurer. The letter will let you know such things as what time period the audit will cover and what records you will need to assemble. The letter will usually be followed up with a phone call to verify that you received the letter and to arrange for a time for the auditor to have access to the records. The auditor will take several days to look through them. Among the things that will be looked at are the receiving of tax-deductible versus non-tax deductible donations. The tithe envelopes will also be examined, and the proper dispersal of funds will be verified. The receiving of the world budget offerings will be rechecked. The auditor will also review the accounts payable documentation to verify expenditures you as a treasurer have made. He or she will look at the minutes of the Finance Committee and Church Board to confirm that your actions reflect their decisions. Payroll-related items are another area that will be looked at by the auditor. Internal control practices will be reviewed as well. The auditor will also check to make sure that remittances are being received in a timely manner. He or she will look to see that trust funds are being handled correctly and that the bank reconciliation process is conducted on a monthly basis. After a thorough review of the records, the conference auditor will write up a report of his or her findings. The report will be two-part, with the general report going to the church board and the internal recommendation report to just you as the local treasurer. The internal recommendation report contains the more specific informational material that will be useful to you as the treasurer. The conference auditor will meet with you to go over the findings. He or she will answer your questions and go over any other issues that need to be addressed. The purpose of the report is to encourage you as the local treasurer and to give validation to the work that you have been doing. Beyond the bottom line of Treasury, there's another important dimension. Developing the Treasury team is essential for the success of the church at all levels. Within the Treasury team are people with different types of skills and personalities and viewpoints and talents. Each person brings valuable resources to the team. The only real cost of developing the Treasury team is the time it takes to build relationships and trust between its members. The benefits, however, are quite extraordinary. When we understand where each other is coming from, it is much easier to work together as a unified team. Being aware of the goals of each part of the team makes achieving them considerably easier. One of the functions of the Treasury team is to communicate information. Properly disseminated information builds strong bonds and relationships. Team members develop a sense of appreciation and trust, knowing they can depend upon each other for information and understanding. In an atmosphere of trust, sharing ideas is much more likely to happen. Confidence in each Treasury member contributes to greater results for our church's mission. A team stands behind each one of its members. Our mission rests on the mutual acceptance of a common goal. We accept the commission of Jesus Christ to take the gospel to the world around us. Our values embrace an acceptance of the sacred trust God has given us. Therefore, we should strive to live honestly in all things, and we seek to exhibit professionalism through appreciation of the Adventist movement, its aspirations, accomplishments, legacies, and goals. As the local church or school treasurer, you are on the front lines, but you're not alone. While you are the first steward of all of God's resources, you have a whole team of resource people standing behind you. We're a team working together, and within our group, you'll find many available resources, including lawyers, insurance, employee benefit specialists, the entire Adventist risk management arm of the church, and the local, union, and division treasury departments. Any and all of these teammates are accessible to you as the local church or school treasurer.
We have come to the end of our presentation, and we thank you for watching. Much more remains to be said and discussed, but we trust that we have provided you with an opportunity to look into some of the major issues you will face as a treasurer of a local congregation or school in this Seventh-day Adventist Church in North America. Should you have questions arising from the presentations, please refer them to your conference treasurer. He or she has been designated to provide you with training and support. Don't hesitate to ask for assistance. Again, we wish to thank you for your careful and efficient volunteer service that makes the work of the church possible. Every week, a miracle happens. The Holy Spirit impresses Adventist believers around the world to support the church with their tithes and offerings. Without that dedication, God's cause would suffer. But once those funds have been given, your work begins as first trustee in a worldwide chain of financial stewards, willing and ready to channel the funds to their final destinations. We represent hundreds, perhaps even thousands of financial and accounting professionals who are eager to share their abilities and experience with you. Above all, it is our desire to stand together with you in that joyous crowd as we welcome our coming King and hear him say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Until then, we will continue to labor by your side. God bless you, and thank you for your willingness to serve.